Humanity had always been the latecomer among the stars. By the time our first colony ships left Sol, dozens of alien civilizations had already carved their empires across the void. To them, we were curious newcomers, stubborn, adaptable, difficult to categorize, but tolerated so long as we remained small. The older races measured their worth in millennia. Humanity measured its worth in struggle. For a time, there was peace. Trade routes connected Earth to the wider galaxy, and our colonies grew steadily, fueled by the relentless determination that had carried us from deserts to oceans, from oceans to the moon, and from the moon to the farthest stars. We were dreamers among giants, cautious enough to avoid provocation, yet proud enough never to bend. The child was born on one of those colonies, a symbol of what was possible. She was not a soldier, not a politician, not a scientist, just a daughter of Earth whose laughter echoed through the halls of a diplomatic station. To us, she represented innocence, the future unburdened by the cruelties of war or politics. To the alien race that despised us, she was an opportunity. The aggressors had always regarded humanity with disdain. In their eyes, we were reckless primitives, dangerous because we refused to submit to their hierarchies. They had watched our steady expansion with unease, and where others saw cooperation, they saw threat. So they chose to make an example. They wanted humanity to remember its place, to bow under fear, to tremble when reminded of who truly ruled the stars. It happened quickly, brutally. A vessel bearing human delegates was intercepted near a border system. There was no warning, no negotiation, no mercy. The ship's defenses were overwhelmed, its passengers executed. Among the dead was the child, silenced before her life had even begun. No honor, no justification, only cold cruelty delivered as a message. News of her death spread faster than light. Within hours, the image of her smiling face filled every broadcast, every colony transmission, every home on Earth. And when her name was spoken, it was not in whispers, but in fury. Humanity had known tragedy before. We had lost millions in wars, billions in plagues and disasters. But this was different. This was deliberate. This was personal. For the older civilizations, the loss of one child might have seemed insignificant, an unfortunate casualty in the endless calculations of power. But for humanity, it was not insignificant at all. We mourned her as if she were the daughter of every family, the sister of every brother, the child of every parent. In her death, we did not see numbers, we saw ourselves. The aliens had believed her killing would cow us, that humanity would retreat behind treaties and plead for safety. Instead, something older and more dangerous stirred within us. Grief sharpened into resolve, and resolve ignited into wrath. Across the colonies, people spoke not of surrender, but of justice. Across Earth, leaders who had once argued for restraint now spoke with one voice. The galaxy had always underestimated humanity's unity. We fought among ourselves, yes, our history was scarred by conflict, but the moment an enemy struck one of us from outside, those divisions dissolved. That had been our truth since tribes gathered to defend villages, since nations rallied to face invaders. And now, as the stars watched, humanity remembered that truth again. The child became more than a memory. She became a banner, a symbol no weapon could erase. Her name was etched into the hearts of billions, whispered in oath by soldiers and shouted in protests that filled the streets. We did not forget, and we did not forgive. From the burning wreckage of one vessel, a fire spread. Not a fire of chaos, but of unity. Shipyards rang with renewed labor. Families offered their sons and daughters to the defense fleets. Scientists worked without rest, engineers built without pause, leaders spoke without hesitation. We had been patient. We had endured insults, tolerated arrogance, looked away from provocations. But this act was final. The aliens had killed a child of Earth. They had hoped we would bow. They had hoped we would cower. Instead, the species they dismissed as fragile rose in silence, then spoke with thunder. Across every colony, across the homeworld itself, a single truth crystallized in the hearts of humanity. We would not let this crime fade into the dust of history. We would answer it. And when we answered, the galaxy would understand what it meant to harm one of our own. The child's funeral was unlike anything humanity had ever seen. Her name was spoken across the stars, not as a whisper of mourning but as a call that bound billions together. From the skyscrapers of Earth to the dust-laden colonies, entire populations stood in silence, united by the image of a small coffin lowered into the soil of her homeworld. No single family claimed her. She belonged to all of us now. Her death crystallized a truth that had lingered beneath the surface for decades. Humanity could not continue pretending weakness in a galaxy that preyed upon it. The illusion of safety under treaties and diplomacy had been shattered. The aliens had not struck at armies or fleets. They had struck at innocence itself. That made every man, woman, and child a witness to the crime. In the weeks that followed, sorrow hardened into determination. Politicians who once argued for patience now demanded retribution. Admirals, long forced to restrain their fleets, pressed for immediate mobilization. Even those who had opposed military expansion found themselves swept along by the tidal force of collective outrage. For once, humanity spoke with one voice. Alien observers watched with confusion. They had seen other civilizations fractured by tragedy, consumed by despair or internal blame. They expected humanity to crumble, to beg for protection from stronger allies. Instead, the exact opposite occurred. Grief became fuel. Our species had endured too many centuries of catastrophe to collapse beneath one loss, no matter how cruel. The Council of Earth convened in a chamber filled with tension. The decision was made not after endless debate, but in the silence that followed a single sentence. They murdered our child. They have declared war upon us all. There was no dissent. No hesitation. The vote was unanimous. Mobilization began immediately. Colonies once devoted solely to agriculture and trade shifted overnight into war economies. Shipyards lit their furnaces around the clock. Factories that once produced machinery for exploration retooled to forge weapons and armor. Civilian transports were refitted as auxiliary carriers. Every hand that could work was called to serve, and none refused. The aliens had underestimated a fundamental truth about humanity. We are at our most dangerous not when we expand, not when we build, but when we defend what we love. No power in the galaxy could comprehend the depth of fury that comes from a single act of injustice against one of our own. For every parent, that child's face was their daughter. For every soldier, she was their sister. For every leader, she was their responsibility. And that responsibility had been betrayed. Our leaders understood the weight of the moment. Humanity was no longer preparing for war in secret. Humanity was war, made flesh and steel. In speech after speech, commanders addressed their fleets not with empty rhetoric, but with a simple truth. We fight because they took from us. We fight because they thought we would not. We fight because no one else will protect us but ourselves. What followed was not chaos but precision. Recruitment surged beyond expectation. Volunteers filled ranks before conscription was even considered. Families did not resist the call, they embraced it. Sons and daughters left their homes with determination in their eyes. Parents saluted them with pride rather than sorrow. The collective will of a species had shifted overnight. The child's name became the rallying cry of the fleet. Painted on hulls, whispered in vows, carved into the armor of soldiers, it became a symbol of defiance no enemy could erase. Humanity did not march toward war in fear. We marched in fury. And that fury gave us clarity. Alien powers that once dismissed us now began to whisper. They had seen uprisings before, rebellions crushed, resistance smothered. But this was different. There was no division in our voice, no hesitation in our stride. The galaxy was watching the birth of something it did not understand, a species unified not by conquest, but by grief, transmuted into iron resolve. Every signal from Earth carried the same message, delivered without embellishment. We are coming. There were no pleas for allies, no requests for assistance. Humanity would carry this burden alone. Not because we lacked friends, but because this war was ours to fight. In the end, the child had given us more than sorrow. She had given us unity, the kind of unity no empire, no federation, no coalition had ever achieved. And as the first ships of the fleet began to depart from orbit, one truth resounded through every heart. Her death had ended an age of caution. From that day onward, humanity was no longer the apprentice among the stars. We were a force awakened, and nothing in the galaxy would ever silence you. The first ships left Earth not as scouts, but as thunderheads before a storm. Humanity did not creep into this war. We surged into it with the weight of centuries behind us. For decades, our fleets had been restrained, their true strength concealed beneath diplomatic veneers. Now, for the first time, they were free to act without hesitation. Each vessel carried the legacy of a people who had never stopped preparing. While alien powers measured strength by tradition and bloodline, humanity measured it by invention. We had taken the lessons of 1,000 wars, compressed them into steel hulls, and forged weapons not for intimidation, but for survival. The galaxy had assumed our restraint was weakness. In truth, it was patience. The opening strikes shattered that illusion. Alien outposts along the border fell in hours, not days. Our ships moved with precision, striking not where the enemy expected but where they were most vulnerable. Admirals orchestrated battles as if conducting a symphony, disrupting supply lines, silencing communications, and isolating fleets before crushing them. Each engagement was swift, merciless, and final. Reports spread quickly through alien networks. What they had dismissed as a fledgling fleet was revealed as something far more dangerous. Human warships fought with relentless adaptability, changing formations mid-battle, turning defeats into traps, and exploiting weaknesses with terrifying speed. Commanders who expected predictable tactics instead faced an enemy that learned faster than they could react. The first true clash came when an enemy armada attempted to block our advance. They outnumbered us 2-1, confident that sheer scale would overwhelm. But numbers had never been humanity's only weapon. We fought like predators, silent until the strike, ferocious when unleashed. Our fleet split, flanking from impossible angles, exploiting blind spots the enemy didn't know existed. Hours later, the alien armada was nothing more than wreckage drifting in silence. What set humanity apart was not only technology or numbers, but will. Pilots pressed forward even when systems failed, soldiers fought on even when the odds were hopeless, and commanders refused to yield ground once taken. Every human loss was mourned, but every loss also deepened our resolve. To us, each fallen soldier was another name beside the child's, another reason to keep fighting. The aliens began to understand too late. They had expected panic, but found discipline. They had expected desperation, but found mastery. In their arrogance, they had mistaken restraint for weakness. Now they whispered a truth they had long denied: humans were not prey. We were hunters who had simply chosen not to hunt, until now. Across the void, messages echoed from human fleets. You killed one of us. Now face all of us. It was not a boast, not a threat, but a statement of fact. Entire civilizations watched as the balance of power shifted in weeks, not centuries. Worlds that had never feared humans now began to weigh every word carefully. Allies reconsidered their loyalties. Rivals watched in silence, uncertain whether to resist or to wait for the storm to pass. For the first time in galactic history, humanity revealed its teeth. The child's death had not broken us, it had forged us into something the galaxy had not anticipated. A force of will bound tighter than steel, sharper than any blade, relentless as fire. Where our fleets moved, silence followed. Where our armies struck, the ground itself bore witness to a people who would not forgive. The enemies who had sought to humble us now faced extinction, and they knew it. Every destroyed fleet, every conquered stronghold carried the same message: this was no ordinary war. This was justice sharpened into vengeance. This was the awakening of a species that refused to kneel. And as the wreckage of our enemies drifted in the dark, one truth spread from world to world, whispered first with fear, then with certainty: humanity had risen. The galaxy would never mistake silence for weakness again. The galaxy did not take long to feel the weight of what had been unleashed. What began as border skirmishes became a cascade of victories that redrew entire star maps. Systems once thought impregnable fell within days. The aliens who had struck at humanity expected retribution, but they had not imagined annihilation moving with such relentless precision. News spread faster than fleets could travel. On neutral worlds, traders whispered of human warships tearing through enemy strongholds with clinical efficiency. On distant colonies, oppressed peoples replayed broadcasts of alien fleets burning in orbit, daring to hope for freedom. And within enemy territory, fear became an epidemic more destructive than any weapon. Humanity's war was not one of chaos but of design. Every strike was measured, every campaign aimed not only to destroy but to destabilize. We severed supply lines, dismantled command structures, and left enemy populations questioning their leaders. The invincible facade of those who had long terrorized the stars crumbled under the weight of human ingenuity and persistence. But humanity's wrath was not blind. For every world belonging to the aggressors that was reduced to ruin, another was liberated. Alien species enslaved or suppressed for centuries suddenly found themselves staring at human banners. To them, humanity was not simply an avenger but a liberator, a force willing to spill blood not only for its own but for the principle that none should be broken without consequence. In council chambers across the galaxy, panic consumed the rulers who had once dismissed us. Some debated intervention, but none dared move openly. They remembered too clearly how swiftly our fleets adapted, how decisively our commanders struck. To oppose humanity now was to risk being dragged into the same storm. So they watched in silence, waiting for the fire to burn itself out, fearing it never would. The enemy, once proud and arrogant, became desperate. They launched counteroffensives with everything they could muster, hoping to halt our advance by sheer force. It changed nothing. Humanity absorbed their blows and returned them with greater ferocity. Every failed attempt weakened them further, every defeat echoed across their empire like a death knell. Our strength was not only in ships or weapons, but in endurance. Where other species faltered after prolonged conflict, humanity only grew sharper. Losses hardened us. Sacrifice strengthened our will. Each funeral was a reminder, each scar another promise that the fight would not end until justice was complete. Against such resolve, no fleet, no empire, no coalition could hold. By now, the galaxy no longer wondered whether humanity would win, but how far we would go. Some prayed we would stop with vengeance, others feared we might seek conquest. What they failed to grasp was that humanity did not hunger for dominion. We sought only to ensure no one would ever again believe they could harm us without consequence. In the shadows of burning worlds, alien children whispered the names of human fleets with awe. The oppressed began to rise, emboldened by the sight of an enemy greater than their masters brought low. Stories spread faster than truth, tales of human captains who fought without fear, of soldiers who marched through fire, of fleets that moved like storms. Legends grew with every victory. Among humanity, there was no celebration, only grim determination. Each battle won was one step closer to the reckoning. Commanders carried maps marked not with conquests but with debts to be repaid. Soldiers fought not for glory, but for the memory of a child whose death had ignited the fire in all of us. At last, the path ahead was clear. The enemy's borders lay shattered, their fleets broken, their allies silent. Their capital system loomed as the final bastion of defiance. Every human fleet turned toward it, not with hesitation, but with the certainty of justice long denied. And as the engines roared and the armadas moved, the galaxy understood what the aggressors had failed to see. Humanity did not fight for conquest, nor for dominance. Humanity fought because we had been wronged, and we would not rest until the scales were balanced. The reckoning had arrived, and nothing in the stars could stand against it. The final march toward the enemy's heart carried no hesitation. Every ship, every soldier, every commander knew the cost that awaited, yet not one faltered. Humanity had endured the long road of vengeance, and at its end lay the capital world of those who had believed themselves untouchable. The skies above it darkened as our fleets emerged, wave after wave, until the system itself seemed drowned in steel and fire. The enemy's last defenders fought with desperation, hurling everything they had left into the void. Their fleets came in endless swarms, their weapons blazing with the panic of extinction. But desperation cannot match discipline. Humanity met them with unbreakable resolve. Battle after battle, formation after formation, their resistance crumbled. They had once called themselves masters of the stars, but against the fury of a unified Earth, they were only another obstacle. The ground campaign that followed was brutal, but inevitable. Our armies advanced through fortified cities and shattered defenses, carrying with them the weight of every loss suffered, every injustice endured. The enemy's leaders retreated deeper into their fortresses, clinging to power even as their people looked on in despair. For the first time in generations, those rulers were forced to witness what they had always dismissed: the unstoppable force of a people who refused to be broken. At last, their capital citadel fell. No fleet remained, no army stood ready to resist. What remained of their leadership was dragged from their halls, faces pale with the realization that their arrogance had doomed their empire. They expected trial by fire, perhaps annihilation. Instead, they faced something far worse for their pride: judgment not from generals or conquerors, but from those they had wronged most deeply. Among the delegation that accepted their surrender was not a soldier clad in armor, but a mother who had lost her child in the first act of this war. She did not speak in rage or demand blood. She spoke only a single truth. "You thought the life of one child meant nothing. You have now learned that it meant everything." The silence that followed broke what little defiance remained. They bent their heads, not to conquerors, but to humanity's grief turned into unshakable will. With victory came choice. Humanity could have razed their worlds, extinguished their species, and claimed their empire as spoils. No power could have stopped us. But vengeance alone was never our purpose. The war had never been about conquest. It had been about justice, about ensuring that no civilization would ever again mistake mercy for weakness. And so, instead of ashes, we left them with memory. We dismantled their war machine, stripped them of the weapons they had once used to terrorize others, and placed their worlds under watch. But we did not destroy them. We left them alive, forced to live with the knowledge that humanity had spared what it could have erased. That mercy was not weakness. It was proof of strength greater than fear could ever inspire. Across the galaxy, the message was understood. Humanity was no longer seen as fragile newcomers. We were not to be pitted, nor underestimated, nor dismissed. We were to be respected, because we had shown that even the smallest injustice could ignite a fire large enough to reshape the stars. Our fleets returned home not as conquerors, but as guardians who had proven that our love for our own was a force no empire could withstand. The child's name endured long after the war ended. It was carved into monuments on Earth, inscribed on the walls of starships, spoken in oaths by every soldier who swore to protect humanity's future. In every colony, her memory lived as a reminder of what had been lost and what had been gained: unity, purpose, and the knowledge that humanity's strength came not from domination, but from the refusal to ever again be silenced. Generations later, stories of that war would be told not as a tale of vengeance, but as the moment when humanity claimed its place among the stars. The galaxy remembered the battles, the victories, the fear, but humanity remembered a single truth. We did not rise because we sought power. We rose because we loved, and when that love was attacked, it became unbreakable. The child they killed was only one life, but it was enough to awaken a species. They believed her death would humble us. Instead, it made us eternal.